So the big news this week is the massively heralded coming out of Olympic athlete Bruce Jenner as a wannabe pretend woman. This is none of my business. If it were Jenner's own private business, kept to himself and to his immediate family, it would be none of my business whatever. The man made a huge point of making a great big spectacle of his declaration of femininity, reportedly viewed by 16.9 million people. I was not among them. I deliberately tuned away because I am opposed to the celebration of squalor, which of course is what that was. On the one hand, it's a great big victory for the anti-family agenda of Marxism generally. This is what feminism, gay rights, the so-called queer transgender agenda, etc., every arm of the left is in fact the same one jackbooted foot. They are superficially different organizations that all share the same ideology and the same membership. The people protesting nuclear power today will be the ones protesting Israel tomorrow, will be the ones protesting rape on campus the next day, and holding a celebration of kink pornography on the fifth day. These are all the same people, and they all have one agenda, and that agenda is one world tyranny. Why they want this obviously is going to vary from person to person, and I'm not accusing Jenner of being a member of this conspiracy. My guess, I don't know Bruce Jenner, and I doubt I ever will, but my guess is that the actual malady he's suffering from is a deficit of acclaim. The man has spent his entire life pursuing public acclaim, first as a track star. I mean, it's unbelievably brilliant to consider that we know about Bruce Jenner in the first place because he was a track star. Here's a man who's racing after fame all the time, literally, physically racing after fame. His recent notoriety comes about through his association with the Kardashian clan, a clique of seemingly sociopathically motivated high incandescents cannot possibly get enough attention, and Jenner was a part of that. And Judgy Bitch raises the interesting possibility that his pursuit of femininity comes about by his own internal, plausibly subconscious conclusion that the only value that he can be perceived as having comes about through femininity, that his masculinity is a curse, is a stain, is the mark of Cain. She didn't make all those claims. I'm embellishing on what she said. But what she wrote was interesting. It was an interesting take on the story. I think probably my conclusion is closer to the truth, that it really doesn't have too much to do with his so-called sexual identity, but rather with his insatiable need for public acclaim, for attention. And so while the ABC interview was definitely a feather in Marxism's cap, I think the purpose that Jenner was serving was to get a 2-hour infomercial for his forthcoming reality show about his sexual identity crisis. Just to be clear about this, sex is biological, gender is grammatical. I don't make I'm not too fussy about this stuff, but when we talk about gender identity, I don't even know what we're talking about. Gender is an aspect of grammar by which we distinguish the ideas of masculinity and femininity among words. So in English, pudenda refers to the vulva, the uterus, and all of the associated hardware. Pudendam refers to the phallus and the scrotum. We make a distinction, masculine and feminine. We make very few masculine and feminine distinctions in English. The Romance languages are full of them. If you studied French or Spanish in school, if you studied Latin, you discovered all kinds of sex discrimination, including neuter in Latin. Neuter doesn't get used very much in other languages, although it is there, but it's extremely common in Latin. And if you look at male and female grammar in Latin, the idea of penetration is all the way through, that the masculine nouns and adjectives are all expressing the penetrative act in one way or another, and feminine nouns and adjectives are all expressing the penetrated state, the state of being penetrated, the passive and submissive state of being penetrated, as against the active and aggressive dominant state of penetrating. And you could argue that these grammatical constructs color influence our expressions of our sexuality. I don't dispute that. I don't disagree with that. Any reasonable familiarity with anthropology will tell you that there are all kinds of different ways that people have found for expressing their sexuality. The conclusion that academics would draw from that is that sexual behavior is arbitrary. It is not. It is not arbitrary. It is not fungible. It is not flexible. It is cultural and grammatical in origin, if you insist, sex role identity as opposed to sexuality, expressions of sexuality, which are biological in origin. That sex role identity is a father tongue phenomenon. It is a consequence of the thinking brain. And it accordingly, if you look into it a little deeper, you're going to find that the things that we like to talk about in sexual identity emerge from reptilian empathy strategies. We can take that up another day or maybe never because it's not all that interesting. But the things that make people wondrous to behold come about as a result of reptilian empathy strategies in what would otherwise be normal mammals. And if we were normal mammals, there would be nothing interesting about us, and of course we would be incapable of taking interest in any case. We would lack the thinking brain. That the thinking brain makes it possible for us to think about human behavior, but it's the behavior that emerges from the conscious, chosen adoption of reptilian empathy strategies, which would arguably not be ontologically normal to us in the absence of the thinking brain. The adoption of those reptilian strategies is what results in the things that we think of as being interesting about human sexuality. And of course, because the mind focuses on differences rather than similarities as a way of its natural operation, we look for the motion, not the stillness. We look for the variety in color, not the sameness. These are survival strategies, of course. This is all emerging not from our mammal brain, not from our snake brain, but from the origin of the snake brain in some kind of insect brain, which had its origin in some other more primitive organism's kind of brain. That attending to differences is how organisms stay alive. And we're no different in that respect. We do like to attend to differences, but also because of the influence of the thinking brain, because of the influence of father tongue, and because noting differences has been so beneficial to us in terms of advancing our knowledge of the world around us. We have become obsessed with outliers, also because we've surrendered education, all of education, to the cautious temperament. We have become fascinated with outliers. It's all we ever want to talk about are outliers, and thus do we consistently lead ourselves into error. Whether Bruce Jenner actually has some kind of sexual identity problem that is genetic in origin, or whether this is entirely a construct of his mind, that it is a manifestation of some sort of mental illness, which would be my reasonable conclusion. And the mental illness really having nothing to do with his sexuality, but simply with his insatiable need for attention, doesn't really matter. What the origin is doesn't really matter. What matters is that it is unbelievably rare. Unbelievably rare. We are met with the demand. We know that science is politicized. We know, particularly from the climate science business that we talked about a few weeks ago, that science is hugely politicized. And hugely politicized science insists that we must declare that homosexuality is a non-lethal birth defect. This is not what they say. What they say is born that way. And what born that way means is that you were born with a non-lethal birth defect, much akin to epilepsy. I don't credit that. It undoubtedly, there is some truth to it, but if homosexuality is a non-lethal birth defect, then it's going to affect at most 1%, maybe 2% if you insist, of the population, much like epilepsy. And the reason for this is that it can't be conserved. The genes will not be conserved, and they shouldn't be, because they don't result in the reproductive activity that is the alleged purpose of the so-called selfish gene. We're back to Richard Dawkins. Genes seek to reproduce themselves, and non-lethal birth defects inhibit reproduction. People avoid having children with people who suffer from, typically avoid having children with people who suffer from non-lethal birth defects. There is a movement among deaf people to conserve deafness, to deliberately seek to mate with other people who suffer from congenital deafness in order to have deaf children. This is monstrous, in my opinion. You get to, your mileage may vary. You can have a different opinion if you like. I think that's monstrous, and I think that the children, when they achieve legal standing, when they achieve majority, should sue their parents for deliberately inflicting a non-lethal birth defect upon them. I mean, if it happens, it happens. There's no way to predict what's going to happen with the recombination of genes. But if you know predictably and reliably that recombining certain genes will result in a non-lethal birth defect and you do it anyway, you're delivering your child into slavery. And I think that's obscene. That none of us is perfect. All of us have things we have to get over. And if you were born with a non-lethal birth defect, like deafness, like epilepsy, like homosexuality, if you insist, okay, fine. You're unique and perfect the way you are because that's the only way you can be. But to argue that the defect that you're suffering, whether it is genetic in origin or something that happened after you were born, I'm a cripple, for instance. I crushed my hip in an automobile accident. To argue that I am ontologically perfect is an egregious philosophical error. It is incorrect. I am making a false claim. Fat is not beautiful, no matter how many times you say it. If homosexuality is a non-lethal genetic abnormality, it affects at most 2% of the population, and self-reporting through academic surveys, the number comes in somewhere between 4 and 6%. So somewhere between, I don't even know how to do the math on this, 200 to 300%, maybe 500%. An unbelievable number of people are claiming to be homosexuals based on their behavior rather than based on some inviolable genetic predisposition. There is the entire phenomenon of gay until graduation that you find among high-end girls' schools, girls' colleges, where women recognize that the intense sexuality of the adolescent years inhibits their future financial success in the workplace, and so they get involved in homosexual relationships in order to avoid having heterosexual relationships that might derail their careers. This is choosable, and obviously all human behavior is choosable, and that's why talking about a sort of statistical normality or an ontological normality among chosen behavior is less than perfectly rational. It's less than perfectly proportionate to the facts. But there is an ontological normality to human behavior that cannot be defied, that cannot be shouted down, that cannot be yelled at. Bruce Jenner can wear all the dresses that he wants. He can have hormone therapy in order to develop man boobs. He can have reconstructive surgery to make his man boobs bigger. He can have reconstructive surgery to eliminate his phallus and scrotum and replace them with a pretend vulva. But he will never be a woman. He will always be a man. Genetically a man, but ontologically a man, ontologically male. There's nothing he can do to become a woman. He can pretend to be a woman all he wants, and he can pretend by means that are surgically irreversible, which strikes me as being a very poor solution to what is clearly a psychological problem. But he will never ontologically be a woman. And no matter how many people declare themselves to be homosexual, they will still be ontologically heterosexual, if there is such a thing as an alternative to ontological heterosexuality, which I'm inclined to doubt. My doubting this has no dispositive effect, obviously, and if you insist on yelling at me about doubting your religion, then I will shove you into the category of all other people who yell at me for doubting their religion. I'll tell you I don't go to your church. Church of Academic Science seems to me to be as corrupt as every other church. I don't trust the pronouncements of science on controversial topics because I believe that they're taking the positions that they're taking in order to take a side in the controversy. When science takes sides, it's no longer science. It's just another form of religion. Science clearly takes sides now. I don't buy any of it. If there is a genetic cause for some homosexual behavior in some people, it is as rare as epilepsy. It is not common at all. It is not worth thinking about. I clip the outliers, and I say this all the time, because outliers are not worth thinking about. What's worth thinking about is what is normal. And that's the topic of today's homily, is defending normality by not celebrating diversity. Celebrate diversity is one of those slogans of our age. It's a bumper sticker slogan, and what it means is you're wrong and I'm right. What it means is if you insist you're not wrong, I'm going to call you a racist and a sexist and a homophobe, and I'm going to do my best to destroy your career. This is the way Marxism operates now. Marxism is clearly ascendant, and you can tell that by how casual Marxists are about engaging in vicious, coercive, evil, ugly behavior. But it doesn't matter, because what is ontologically normal will out anyway. The beautiful thing about Marxists is by being so anti-family, they don't reproduce. They think that they can continue to reproduce by college professors, but they're destroying the academy as they destroy science. They're destroying everything that undergirds their power base. If they successfully establish their global tyranny before they destroy their power bases, then they may win, but they can't win in the long run, because as soon as they succeed, they fail. They have to. They're anti-reality. They're anti-ontological normality. And in consequence, whenever Marxism achieves its political goals, it immediately self-destructs. It results in collapse of an economy, collapse of a nation's economy, typically followed by years of famine. And the end consequence of that will be the reassertion of the hoplite family ideal in one way or another, because these will be the only families that survive to reproduce. The Marxists will self-annihilate. Feminists are in the process of self-annihilating. Another bit of news this week is a book called Spinster. I owe this to Judgy Bitch also, God bless her. She mentioned it, and then I followed a link from her to an interview with the author at Slate. I have not read the book, and I promise you I never will. It is a book written by a carousel girl, a girl who rode the cock carousel, is what it's called in the manosphere, throughout her 20s. So from college on, she was engaged in progressively shorter and less serious romances that started off as being boyfriend-girlfriend kind of things and ended up just being an endless series of one-night stands, casual encounters with bums. Whores and bums get wet and then spend the rest of their lives trying to forget about each other. And she was one of those whores. She was a cock carousel girl. She wrote a book called Spinster because now she's hit the wall. There's no longer any interest among men in taking her home and using her like a little bit of Kleenex to soap up their stray semen. They're no longer interested in her. So now she has taken a long look at her life and decided that she was a philosophical spinster. Refugees are not a trend. So she notes that since 1970, the number of unmarried women has been on a steady increase. I mean, really a dramatic increase, not quite going completely vertical, but the trend is headed that way, that if this trend continues, there will be no married women left on earth within 50 years. No women will be married. Well, this is not a trend in the sense that women are choosing to be unmarried. It's a trend in the sense that men are choosing to be unmarried, and therefore women are left without husbands. They love to celebrate the ruin of their lives with charming Facebook posts about their surly cats and their eclectic hats, but their lives are tragic. Tragic. from that very first failed romance that may have been the best one she ever had, through the succession of successively less reliable, trustworthy, admirable boyfriends, down to the actual bums that she slept with 1,000 times. Who knows how many times? I hope it wasn't 1,000. But she's now at a state where she has to celebrate her bad choices, and not just celebrate them, but inflict them on younger women. We happened to see the movie Gidget on television yesterday. I often have the television on when I'm working. Volume set at 0 or 1. I can listen to 1% of the volume and hear everything I want to hear, which is typically nothing. But if I do want to hear, then it will catch my attention and I can look up. So we ended up watching a little bit of this movie, and it's love triangle, alpha, beta, pursuing the same girl. How many times have you heard the story? A zillion times. The beta gets the girl in the end. Why? Because betas write movies. That's the first reason. And second, betas buy movie tickets. That an alpha male who wants to get the girl may give her half of a Snickers bar, and if he's really considerate, he'll apologize for the lint that's on the end of it. A beta male who's hoping to get the girl to give him another date, not to get her into bed, but just to give him another date, will spend a ton on her. Will take her out to dinner, take her to the movies, take her for drinks afterward, take her home in a taxi. This is who buys movie tickets, and so the beta is always going to win in the love triangle. The alpha doesn't buy movies. I mean, obviously alphas do buy movie tickets, but that's not the movie audience. That's not the date night movie audience. That's not really the point. The point is the Cliff Robertson character, the kahuna, the alpha, and his philosophical argument. It was the Lost Generation argument that he was making, the World War II and Korean War veterans who decided to be beach bums after the war. This is where the spinsters that we started to notice in the 70s come from, is from this philosophy among men in the late 40s and early 50s, rebelling against conventional Western morality, rebelling against the hoplite ideal, in favor of a lifelong solitary pursuit of random pussy. And this is the argument that Robertson makes in Gidget, not that bold, not that bald, obviously, but that is the argument that he's making. And it was really interesting for me to watch, because that, of course, is the men going their own way argument, is Cliff Robertson's argument. Cliff Robertson in the movie was a true alpha and therefore could pull it off in the way that Captain Capitalism, Aaron Clary, claims to pull off that same thing. We have no way of knowing whether or not this is really true. For all I know, Royce, if there really is a Royce, the author of Chateau Heartiste, for all I know, he's a gay man. He certainly writes like one. He's got the snark of a gay man. If you read Perez Hilton, read half a dozen posts by Perez Hilton, and then go read a half a dozen posts at Chateau Heartiste, and tell me that there's some radical difference in the writing style of these two people. But they could both be female for all I know. The men going their own way argument being made by Alpha Cliff Robertson in Gidget, it doesn't make any sense. It's a cruel and vicious argument to make, even if you can actually get random pussy every night. If you can't, it's even worse. And it's much like the spinster argument. It won't be surly cats and eclectic hats. It'll be video games and possibly softball or skeet shooting or some other fundamentally empty pursuit. Men are better able to live a solitary existence than women. Women are built to engage in storgic love. I mean, literally built from the chest out to engage in storgic love, and the absence of storgic love from their lives is going to matter more than it does to men, but it matters to men and women. This is something that we all need. Refugees are not a trend, and casualties of the sexual revolution are not somehow victors. They are casualties. They have lost. They have lost in the game of love. And books like Spinster and dumbass arguments like the men going their own way argument or the Captain Capitalism argument, those dumbass arguments are easy to entertain when you're young, and to think, oh, this is a noble pursuit, this is a noble commitment that I've made to sustain my solitary existence indefinitely, even if I'm involved with another person, to not let that other person have my sovereignty and to be completely alone in all of my choices and all of my decisions. This is atomism. This is one of the complaints that I can make in some length against Ayn Rand and against libertarianism as such, is this celebration of atomism. This is not ontologically normal. This is not the way that human beings are built to live. We are mammals, and we are meant to live in pack groups like mammals do, in storgic pack groups, in families, much as other mammals do. That we can identify this, talk about it, and perfect it is wonderful, but we can't change it. We can't not be mammals simply because we want to assert the wonder and value and nobility of a solitary existence. But when you make a choice like that at 20 or 25, you say, I'll be what I am, a solitary man, and you're 25 years old, and you think that's going to be easy? I invite you to consider that 20,000 days later, you will be 75 years old. And 20,000 days is a long, long time to live with a poor choice. This is not the way we're meant to live. There can be exceptions, much as Bruce Jenner might be genetically sexually dysmorphic, rather than just psychologically in need of emotional fulfillment. There can be people, I suppose, who are either predisposed to a solitary existence or completely incapable of having a social existence, but this is not ontologically normal. This is not the way we're built. We can clip these outliers, and what we're left with is ontological normality. And ontological normality for human beings is monogamous marital relationships and enduring storgic relationships in the form of a family. This is the way we're built to live. This is the way we're built to die. And to deviate from this pattern is not a problem where the deviation is rare, but as the deviation becomes more common, whether by preference or by, as with all of the spinsters out there, by losing the game of musical chairs, it becomes less and less sustainable. And if you take a look at the DIS charts that I was talking about 2 weeks ago, you can see why. That the balance that you need in your life only comes from other people. I mean, I live a massively imbalanced life. I'm so driven that I'm almost nothing else. My wife is so sociable that she's almost nothing else. And we need each other maybe more than other couples need each other. Maybe that's why we're so happily married, because we need each other so much. We need that balance from each other that we can't provide for ourselves. I mean, you can get stronger where you're weak, but you can't be as strong where you're strongest, and the changes that you're going to make are going to be incremental, time consuming, and probably not nearly as impressive as what you're expecting. Whereas your spouse, if your spouse is really balancing your life, will balance your life in a way that you could never achieve on your own. And a family life does that even more, because much as in a business, you need to balance the DISC profiles. The big boss should be a D, ideally a DS, not so ideally a DI, not so ideally a DC, but really a DS is the best boss. His assistant should be an SD, his secretary, his straw boss should be an SD, because the boss is going to be so driven, he's going to ruffle feathers. So his second in command, or his factotum, his dog robber, should be so much more S to put those feathers back into line and keep everybody happy. But the big boss should be a D. The head of R&D and the head of accounting, the CIO, all three of those roles should be filled by C's. And obviously we're looking for C's with a lot of D because we need the work to get done, but we need some S in there too because we need the work to get done, and we still need for people to be happy. The marketing should be handled by an I, and obviously we want an ID because we want the work to get done. But the work, the day-to-day work, the everyday work of the business is going to be done by S's, and every other functionary in that business needs to have an S consciousness, a sociable consciousness, because you need to keep those people coming to work. You need to keep them happy. Innovation is a consequence of sociability. And I mentioned this the other week, that if you decide you want to steal somebody's lunch money, maybe you can get away with it every day, and maybe you can get away with it every day forever. But that person is never going to suggest a new idea to you. The people who suggest new ideas do it because they want things to get better for the group. It comes about from a desire for better results, whether they're D, I, C, or S results. But the desire for better results comes about from a sociable impetus, that I want this to get better for the sake of this us, this organization that I belong to, whether it's a marriage, a family, or a business, or a club. I want it to get better for all of us, and therefore that's why I'm suggesting this innovation. People who are living under tyranny, which is always cautious tyranny, no matter how it originates, it always ends up being cautious tyranny. People who are living under tyranny do not suggest new ideas. They don't even think of them. They don't come up with new ideas because they don't want things to get better for the us. They just want to endure. Ideally, they want to escape, but if they can't escape, they just want to endure, and they don't want to draw attention to themselves, because drawing attention to yourself, if you're not Bruce Jenner, is how you get persecuted, how you lose your job, how your business is destroyed. They don't come up with new ideas because they have no reason to. And that balance of sociability, that balance of disc perfection, is something that you should be looking for in your family too. One of the things that you're going to have as your family gets bigger is you're going to have different people filling disc roles, because this starts as an attention getting strategy. The empathy strategies that we can summarize with a DISC profile originate in attention getting strategies, in survival strategies, in coping strategies, in fitting in strategies, in making things work strategies among children. And having a variety of DISC personality types in the family gives everybody a little bit of a buffer, because when I'm not getting anywhere with one person, I can take my frustrations to another person who will understand them better, because he's sitting in a different corner of the DISC profile and sees things differently. And that diversity of displays, diversity of goal pursuits, diversity of opinions, diversity of approaches, diversity of personalities, diversity of character, diversity of love. This is the kind of diversity that we ought to celebrate, is a diversity among the people that we love, in order to understand that people can be lovable and still be different, and can be radically different and still be amazingly lovable and amazingly loving. And this is how a family works, is by people accommodating each other's differences rather than rebelling against them and rejecting them. This is all good. This is the way we're built. This is the way we're meant to live. I hope that Bruce Jenner finds happiness in the choices that he's making. I hope he finds greater emotional fulfillment. I know that the author of the Spinster book will not find happiness. Her misery will increase, and she will simply lie about it in a louder and louder voice. The good news in the movie Gidget, not only does the beta get the girl, but the alpha learns the error of his ways. He discovers the error of his atomism, and in the end, attempts to regain a foothold in the sociable world. That's kind of a happy ending for him. And that's a happy ending for the men going their own way, if they're serious about expressing all of their values and not just the ones that they feel safest with. And that's really the answer for the young women who are being sucked in by this spinster ideal, is to take account of all of your values and make sure that you're serving all of them in their appropriate hierarchy, in the hierarchy that really matters to you most. But the thing that keeps you sane, the thing that keeps you balanced, the thing that keeps you fulfilled, the thing that makes you lovable, is that interaction with your family, that give and take among the different dispersonality types in your family, and your eagerness, your willingness and your eagerness, your readiness to continue to love those people even though they are so different from you. And that love makes us human, that love makes us whole, that love makes us better every day. I want to thank you so much for the time you spend with me. I know I put you through a lot of hell, make you listen to all kinds of heretical ideas. I hope I make you think. I know talking to you makes me think, so I know I'm ahead of the game. Bless you. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you again next week.